Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. I'm still kind of dealing with the after effects of my cold, so thanks for bearing with me. But let's get into this. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 604 through 606, which will cover manga chapters 678 through 680. And yeah, everyone is back, but they're not out of danger yet. But now Luffy and the Alliance are ready for their counteroffensive. Alright, so synopsis. The Alliance is reunited and have escaped the Shinokuni gas, but that's short-lived as Caesar plans to let the gas in and seal them inside the A tower of the lab, and it's now a race for everyone to get deeper into the facility to rescue the kids and get to safety while Luffy and Smoker seek out Caesar and Virgo and take them down. Alright, so differences. There aren't too many differences in this set of episodes. The first one is in the anime after Law gives everyone the notice to head for the R Tower and find the R66 door, Luffy pulls Robin aside and asks her to do something for him, but in the manga this is only very lightly hinted at. The last panel we see is that after Luffy asks if something is going to happen in the lab after 2 hours, Law mentions to Luffy and he says, well, in that case, and that's where that scene stops, and we never actually see what he does with this information. So that scene in the anime where Luffy actually asks Robin to do something is never actually there. And it's only basically hinted at later on once we do see the result of what this request was. The other thing the anime does is add a bit more internal dialogue to Zoro recalling his own failures after learning Luffy was beaten by Caesar once already. And this change I don't really like, but it's ultimately not a big deal. This is more of a personal preference thing, and I'll go a little bit more into why this is in the actual podcast episode later on. Next, there's a scene where Chopper catches up to Mocha, which is added for the anime. In the manga, we actually don't see Chopper again for quite some time. And while these added scenes are unnecessary, I think it helps to fill in the gaps until that point we do see him again, because a lot seems to have happened, and it adds a little bit more context to what we see later because it is rather abrupt from seeing Chopper sneaking around in the lab after reading Law's note, to then where we see him sort of in a situation that seems completely different from where he was. And so seeing how we got from point A to point B is kind of, I think, really helpful, but ultimately unnecessary. So like, if it's not there, it doesn't take away from it. But the fact that the anime does add a few more scenes to sort of lead you into where we actually see Chopper later on, I think is not a bad thing. And then lastly, there are a couple smaller things added here and there. Things like the dragon attacking Tashigi as well as the G5 Marines, whereas in the manga, it only attacks the soldiers and not Tashigi. You know, there are like just small little changes here and there that are added to sort of either elongate the episodes or change up the pacing so that it fits the sort of the storyboard that they're going for, so that the episodes end at the right point or on like a cliffhanger. Alright, so with the differences out of the way, let's get into the episodes themselves, and picking up from where we left off in the last set of episodes now, that the remaining group on Brownbeard has made it inside, it becomes apparent that there's this massive hole in the door where the poison gas can also enter from. But what I find really impressive about this is that A, the Marine soldiers can pick up this massive piece of metal that looks insanely heavy and fit it back in precisely into the sliced portion, and B, they use mostly wood planks to hammer nails into a solid steel door to prop this thing up, both of which are incredibly ridiculous but also believable in this world at the same time, which is funny. To add to the absurdity, Brook goes into his soul ghost form to have a look outside, and the position he's in while he's in this form is ridiculous, and I love how Oda found probably the funniest yet creepiest position he could have seated Brook in to sell this joke. Similarly, Zoro nodding in satisfaction that the doors were sealed in time, when he and Kinemon literally did nothing but watch the whole time, as everyone else was panicking trying to close the door, is also pretty funny. I do feel this is kind of out of character for Zoro though. I mean, we've seen him panic pre-time skip about stuff, and this was pretty imminent threats, like hurtling towards them. But I guess this more stoic post-time skip Zoro maybe isn't as fazed by life-threatening things now that he's just that much stronger. It is interesting to see sort of the evolution of Zoro in the post-time skip era. He just seems way more stoic and less emotive than he used to be, which is something I both enjoy and don't enjoy at the same time. On the one hand, it is cool to see this new incredibly badass Zoro being almost unshakable, but at the same time, I loved seeing Zoro freak out every now and then being totally caught off guard. And because he is that stoic badass 85% of the time, and the tiny 15 or so percent of the time he was crazy and shaken was always super funny. And I feel like post time skip, that ratio has gone down to like a minuscule 95 to 5 breakdown. We rarely ever get to see him freak out or show over the top emotion anymore, which is something that the live action Zoro seemed to embrace right from the get go. Which in the past, and in past episodes, I've mentioned I was not the biggest fan of either in the live action. To me, it seems like Oda has really fallen in love with this more stoic and badass version of Zoro, and wants that to kind of be the default representation of Zoro's personality going forward, which to me is why the live action started off that way as well. But for the live action, I feel like you're missing the sort of growth of why and how he became that way due to his experiences that led him to become that. Whereas in the anime, I can kind of understand and accept that this is who he is now due to much of the things that's happened to him up to this point. But I personally wish more of that old Zoro would kind of come back just a bit more. Like, he doesn't necessarily need to be what he was in the East Blue Saga or even like the early part of the Grand Line. But I do wish we got a little bit more comedic Zoro. Whereas, definitely post time skip, you really don't get to see a lot of that. Like, he's definitely more positioned as the straight man to all the ridiculousness of the other characters. But staying on Zoro, there's a particularly cool moment for him in the next scene where he realizes just how serious the stakes are now that they're in the new world. And after learning from Usopp that Caesar has the ability to cut off oxygen and that Luffy was taken down by Caesar using this technique, Zoro scolds Luffy a little bit, reminding him to take things seriously now that they're in the new world. And this moment is such a great moment for so many reasons. First off, on the surface, it's another classic example of Zoro keeping Luffy honest, as well to have his back while reminding him what it means to be the captain of the crew. And we've seen this time and time again in the past, most notably during Water 7, but also at several different moments throughout the series. However, there's of course the fact that Zoro is actually more upset at his own kind of defeat to the Yetis, and this was actually more of a scolding aimed at himself because he knows that he and Luffy, and to an extent Sanji, all need to be held to higher standards when it comes to these things because the rest of the crew depend on them. Then there is the Sanji part of all of this too, where Sanji knows exactly what Zoro is trying to say, mentioning, whoa, you're so hard on yourself, with a little smirk. And the way I always take it is that he's happy and even, dare I say, respects Zoro here for recognizing that they all need to be better. But Zoro himself puts so much of that responsibility on himself, like we've discussed in the past, how he basically shoulders sort of the protective role of the entire crew. And one of the rare moments that Sanji gives Zoro his props, and I love this little moment between the monster trio recognizing and supporting one another, because it really does show that Zoro and Sanji do actually respect each other, and they actually might even like each other. And so like this is one of those scenes where I always point to as to why people who bring up the theory that Sanji and Zoro actually hate each other, and they're just kind of there because they want to be there for Luffy, but in reality they don't like each other. Well, I think that's completely BS. Like, I don't know what story you've been reading if that's your idea of Zoro and Sanji's relationship. Sure, they're definitely incredibly different people, and they don't like how each person kind of lives their lives and what kind of personality they have, but deep down they would sacrifice each other's life for anything. And I think the fact that Sanji and Zoro really do respect each other and like each other, I think they just don't they just don't agree on a lot of things. But yeah, I do think that this is one of those scenes where you really do get a sense of like, yeah, at least on Sanji's end, that he really does respect Zoro. And there are plenty of moments where Zoro shows concern for Sanji, and those are the moments where, yeah, you do realize that Zoro also respects Sanji as well. But like I said in the differences section, I will say, I think the more subtle version of this scene in the manga is my preferred depiction of this scene, because it's very minimal in terms of what it explicitly says, but you can infer all of this from the facial features and the small bits of dialogue. However, the anime kind of has to like spell every detail of this out for you, breaking up the flow of what should have been a moment just for the monster trio. The anime decides to include the rest of the crew, their reactions to this, which isn't a bad thing, but I like that it was between these three specific nakama because of their specific roles as the physical protectors of the crew. And also, it's just like the subtlety of it really helps in terms of just like, I don't know, rewarding the reader more. And so when you're a viewer of the anime, I don't know, it feels a little pandering when it goes out of its way to like verbatim tell you exactly what the scene is supposed to mean and how you're supposed to take it. Which I know that Toei did this so that, the younger audiences can certainly follow along with what this means. Because while Oda writes the manga with the target audience being preteen to teenage boys, obviously the anime is seen by many children, because at this time, One Piece was airing on Sunday mornings. So it's kind of like your sort of Saturday morning cartoon type of audience. And so you could definitely get far younger kids watching the show. And so, yeah, some of this stuff may fly over their heads. And so I think that's why Toei goes out of its way to kind of just explicitly spell this out, as well as the fact that, yeah, it's an opportunity to extend and pad out timing. But from there, Luffy utilizes the new move seen in the Hands Up opening, the Gomu Gomu no UFO, where he winds his lower body up and spins it around at insane rates, almost giving him the ability to float around a tiny bit. And it's a fun move that I don't think he ever uses beyond this moment again, which really sucks because I think this move is pretty hilarious and pretty fun. Obviously, it's mostly for, taking out a huge group of fodder, so he can't really use it one-on-one fights, but I just think this move is so funny, and I wish he would use it more often. It reminds me a lot of Gomu Gomu no Hanabi from the Skypiea arc, where he kind of like winds his entire body up but into a ball, and then all of his limbs just shoot out from the center. This one, he kind of like spins around like a top and just does his lower body. But I feel like they're the same type of energy, and I like both moves, and I wish he would use them more often. I think that's one of my bigger complaints about post-time skip, is that we get fewer and fewer like creative moves. Not to say that we don't get any, but I feel like from here on out, we start to see like more just advanced versions of the same moves we've seen, over and over. Like for example, like Gomu Gomu no Red Hawk. Yeah, that's a new move and it looks cool and I love that move. But you can't deny that it's just a more upgraded version of Gomu Gomu no Jet Pistol, just with fire. And so a lot of that, as you'll see, a lot of his moves are basically just stronger versions of what he used to use. And so, you'll see him coat them with armament and it becomes a different move, but it's still, Gomu Gomu no Gatling or Gomu Gomu no Bazooka, and it's the same thing. And you don't get as many of these like random moves. And so that's one thing I do think that's kind of missing from post time skip, is that Oda doesn't have as many creative moves. And this isn't just Luffy's problem. This is almost a case where everyone, their moves are just kind of upgraded from what they used to have, which, isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself, and especially in the early parts of it. But as you'll see as the series goes on, that's kind of a theme that basically perpetuates throughout the entire series almost. And so you get fewer and fewer like brand new moves, which I guess to a certain extent, I can't really blame Oda for that, because yeah, there's only so many ways you can do certain things with certain powers and stuff like that. And not to say that Oda doesn't have a lot of good ideas still. Like he definitely does, particularly when you get to like Wano and stuff like that. You do start to see some pretty cool things. But yeah, there are a lot of like just repeats of old moves, which is a little unfortunate. Another pretty hilarious moment is Luffy eventually runs into an enemy that is a spider-human hybrid. But as Luffy points out, this guy seemingly is very confusing as a centaur, because he's clearly not a normal human with a body of a spider. But for some reason, he's got 8 human legs and arms. Luffy just attacks him out of confusion, yelling, "What the hell kind of centaur are you?" as he knocks him out. And I feel like this is just one of those random off-kilter jokes that Oda loves to throw in there, kind of to poke fun at himself, which is pretty funny. Back at the entrance, the G5 Marines are still trying to capture the Straw Hats, but what frustrates me about this entire scene is the fact that Smoker and Tashigi at no point intervene. Like up till now, at any point, they could have easily intervened and told them that they have a temporary truce, and then they put aside their differences in order for the survival of themselves and the rescue of the children. But instead, they literally do nothing for several minutes, even letting Zoro, Brook, and Kinemon cut a few of them down, injuring them for no reason, really, while eating up valuable time for escape, and it ultimately ends up costing several of them. Tashigi, for her part, as the captain, does try to remain to help as many of her men, but they realize there's no more time left, so a few of them decide to grab her and throw her into the door before it closes, in probably one of the more iconic panels slash moments of Punk Hazard, as you see the remaining G5 soldiers sacrifice themselves with smiles and thumbs up as they get solidified in the poison cast molds. And this moment, in a sea of amazing moments throughout the series, has always stayed with me. From the G5 officer Pike, the one at the door yelling back to his fallen comrades that they did a great job and reassures them that they'll take care of Tashigi for them, to how in order to get through to Tashigi when she's desperate to go back in to save them, he doesn't refer to her as Tashigi-chan, but in the moment, they get serious and call her Captain Tashigi or Tashigi Taisa. Like, there's something so heroic yet haunting seeing those men sacrifice themselves for Tashigi, with their cast molds all gleefully entrusting their dear captain to the rest of their nakama. Even within the Marines, you see a few of them carry that inherited Will of D type spirit, as these guys die with a smile on their face, entrusting their will to the others to carry that on. And there's an interesting thought I've had about this particular moment when it comes to the Will of D and how these people died with smiles. And one thing that seems to be true and something that I hadn't quite put my finger on, which is why they're smiling. Like, of course, I've always chalked it up to these guys can die while smiling because they've all lived lives that contain, few regrets and can die fulfilled for the most part. But then seeing these guys, it kind of clicked for me because, while to my knowledge, none of these guys are Ds, they have the same energy. But Oda went out of his way to show that one of the earlier G5 Marine soldiers who did die without a smile, he went so far as to show him dying with a tear coming out of his eye and the tear hardening. It really hammers home that point that this soldier died with immense sadness and pain. And I have to think he did this for a reason. Like, he showed both versions. Like, the biggest one being to show that these guys died in two different situations. But to me, I'd say the biggest difference is that while the first soldier died out of self-preservation, the ones that died smiling were all doing it out of self-sacrifice for someone they cared for or loved, and while passing something along to someone else. When you think back to all the D-Clan members that we've seen thus far die, they all are protecting something, and the reason they're more than happy to die smiling is because they know that someone or something, important to them is being helped by their sacrifice. And it comes down to dying for something you love and care about. I know it seems really obvious, but I didn't quite put it all together succinctly until I saw this moment. Like, it's pretty clear that smiling upon death is very closely associated with the D-Clan, but it's clear that it's not exclusive to them. And one of my biggest theories is that the D-Clan is not some sort of lineage or bloodline, but more so like a philosophy or a pledge that people of a certain makeup become or can become. I always feel that anyone can become a D-Clan member even without the middle D initial. It's all about how you choose to live your life, and one that kind of strives for freedom for everyone is willing to put people first, and when it comes down to it would happily sacrifice themselves if it meant that the future of those that they cared for is brighter. And that's why you see people like Bellemare or Hiruluk also smile upon their deaths, because they know that what they're doing is for the betterment and happiness of those they care for, and that their dreams, goals, and will are in good hands because they've entrusted them to, say, like Nami and Nojiko or Chopper and Dalton. Like, they know that they can trust that these folks will carry on their legacy, and that even if their journey is over, that their work will be inherited, and that those few people that they love and care for are safe. Now, obviously, I think the one exception I can think of to this point is when Luffy almost dies at Logtown. When he's about to be cut down by Buggy, he's seen smiling there, ready to die, but he's neither protecting anything or passing anything along. I think this moment just shows how special Luffy is compared to even anyone else, even among the D-Clan. Like, this dude is so free that he can literally die at any given moment and be happy with it. I don't know if that's how you're supposed to interpret that moment, but that's kind of how I see it, because that is, to my recollection, the only moment from now until what we've seen in chapter 1135 up to this point. And so, yeah, I think this is really the only difference in sort of that one moment where a D-Clan member is almost dying and is just seen smiling without having done anything. But that's just kind of my interpretation. Obviously, I could be completely wrong about that. Moving back to the story though, despite how the last episode ended on a somber note, the beginning of episode 606 had me busting out laughing with the Straw Hats riding Brownbeard and very much taking it for granted, between Zoro and Kinemon making it sound like they had a very good and profound reason for needing a ride, but it turns out both of them just got tired of running, to Usopp using Brownbeard's back as a coat rack, and finally the thing that got me laughing the most was Brook casually asking if Brownbeard had any food, like he was expecting in-flight service on an airplane. And I just love when Brook talks all gentlemanly in the most inappropriate times. And Cho, the voice actor for Brook, portrays this so perfectly with this like very calm and proper performance, but he's saying the most absurd things at the most inappropriate times. I love it when Brook does these things. He doesn't do it very often, but when he does, it hits so hard and it's so funny. But after this, it goes right back to a pretty serious and dire situation as Tashigi and the G5 Marines are faced with the dragon that was accidentally let in. But that's not the worst of it, as shortly Virgo appears and begins to shigun everyone mercilessly, to everyone but Tashigi's shock. And this is yet another hard betrayal by a character towards a group of people that had deep trust in someone. And the arc continues to hit home that theme that people aren't all that they seem, and if you put too much blind trust in the wrong people just because of their societal standing as a Marine officer or a scientist, or inversely, you don't put enough trust in people who may have questionable standing, like a pirate, for example, but show you that they are good through their actions, that's also incorrect as well. Virgo is especially a tough situation because he was so good at basically lying, and his actions even matched those of a good person, that it's not fair to blame the G5 Marines for their loyalty and admiration of him, whereas Caesar, despite his lies, constantly showed how little disregard he had for people with his actions. And inverse to Virgo and the G5 Marines, it's funny because Virgo was a very trusted person and now they're faced with his betrayal. But on the opposite end, when Sanji later comes to save them all, they are led to believe that maybe Sanji is not a bad guy after all. And so they're having this situation in both directions, in fact. And yeah, circling back to Smoker's line about blind faith in Marine pride is not a good thing, and that no organization should be put up on a pedestal, and as long as it's made up of people, it's never going to be perfect. His line about if you assume too much, you'll miss the enemy turned out to be very true, and I think you can take it as to meaning that essentially Smoker was already starting to suspect that Virgo was the one who betrayed them all the way back in the cave after they had just lost to Law and Caesar. Tashigi is left helpless against Virgo as he's far too powerful for her, as she has to sit there watching even more of her men get killed one by one. While this moment does set up a really cool moment for Sanji, I hate that it comes at the cost of Tashigi just being reduced to another damsel in distress, which is unfortunate because this won't be the last time even in just this arc. However, despite all that, just when you think Tashigi is in some real trouble, it was not the person who I thought would come to her rescue. Although I probably should have seen this coming. I thought maybe Smoker or Zoro would come, but it was in fact Sanji who comes out of nowhere to blast the hell out of Virgo right into the wall. And again, I will reiterate that the anime does not do this hit on Virgo justice, as in the manga, this kick looks like Virgo was hit by a train, and his line about hearing a woman's tear fall is what beckons to gets me every time. I know Sanji always has like super senses when it comes to women in trouble, but this one was so far into the realm of absurd that it cracks me up every time. Despite how absurd it is though, it is nonetheless a classic and epic Sanji moment. Speaking of Virgo though, something that I never really considered was that not only was he a corrupt marine as well as a merciless one, which are types of Marines we've seen plenty of, this is really the first time we've seen one that was a full-on spy that was only pretending to be a Marine. The closest thing we got up till now was Shiryu, who started as someone who was too cruel and merciless, but eventually turned into a traitor and became a pirate, but Virgo was a pirate right from the get-go. And it really just emphasizes Smoker's point that the Marines as an institution is nowhere near a perfect organization and should not be blindly followed without question. Not only are there corrupt Marines just in it for themselves, there are corrupt Marines that are there to serve the bidding of the evil celestial dragons and the world government. Then there are Marines that are just straight up evil and use their power for oppression. But now you have this new wrinkle in that there are Marines that are literally not even Marines. They're pirates or bad guys pretending to be good Marines. And that adds a whole new dimension to how messed up the Marines are. There are just too many cracks in that organization. Now, there are two final scenes left in these sets of episodes. One where Chopper catches up to Mocha and gives her a sedative to calm her down. But the one I just want to briefly mention is when Smoker and Luffy finally arrive back at Caesar's lab. And I find it so funny that the fire Luffy was kicking up because he was running so fast was actually real and not another comic book visual gag to signify he was running fast. He was, in fact, running so fast to try and keep up with Smoker that he left fire trails. And I love that he even mentions this fact that he ran so fast to keep up with him that he burnt the ground on the way there. I mean, I think this is like one of those really like funny moments where it kind of parodies what your expectation is on comic books. Because yeah, normally when you see fire trails like that, they're not actually there. They're just really to signify, oh yeah, this guy is running hella fast. But the fact that Luffy actually kicked up fire is funny. And at the same time, I thought there might be something more to Fire and Luffy because that's now two instances in back-to-back arcs where Luffy has generated fire from his body. The first, of course, being Gomu Gomu no Red Hawk, but that was a legit attack. But yeah, it's interesting seeing all these fire references, although it may be kind of a spoiler, but I don't think this really actually goes anywhere, at least not at this point. So yeah, this was kind of my thinking at the time when I saw this because I was like, huh, that's like two times where like he's generating fire from his body. I wonder if there's something more to this. But anyways, naturally we don't want to get any, too ahead of ourselves as there is still a lot of Punk Hazard left. And while the pacing and the animation go down, the storytelling does not. Now that the action is beginning to ramp up, along with Oda's trademark ticking time bomb story trope of the Shinokuni gas chasing them, things have become another race to survival and achieve victory, which will be fun to dive into as we go on with these episodes. But this is where we'll end today's. And if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes, or to see pictures of my manga collection and One Piece card collection. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking out the time to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section this time, but stay safe out there and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!